Hi, I'm Carla with Race to Walk. Thanks for joining me. And today I'm going to be sharing some of my tips for new graduate students. So here's the deal. A couple years ago, I graduated from the apologetics program at Houston Baptist University. And at the beginning of every semester, current and students and alumni are asked to give their advice for incoming students. And so a couple years ago, I wrote out a big long list of my tips. And then this year, the same request came up again. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to turn that list of tips into a video. So instead of going back and tracking down my comments again and reposting them, I can just share a link to the video, and also maybe some other people will get some use out of this as well. But before we get started, a little bit about this channel. Here we share good thoughts about good words. And on Fridays, I host a live Bible study on Instagram at Race to Walk. And then I publish 2 videos a week. I publish a video about books, and I also publish a replay of that Bible study video with some studies. And sometimes I publish a third video like this one. So be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you can get updates about new videos. I started the apologetics program in the fall of 2015. I graduated in fall of 2017. But before this, my undergraduate degree was in business. And I have a video called The Book That Changed My Life about how I came to the apologetics program. But as far as this particular type of program, it was a completely different wheelhouse from my undergraduate degree. So I'm going to have 2 sections of my tips. So the first are some practical tips and strategies, and the second is just kind of having a mindset of going into this. The first tip that I want to give you is that as you're going into this program, this was very different for me coming from a business background as an undergraduate. But since this program is so interdisciplinary, since, it covers history, philosophy, theology, literature, the odds are that there's going to come to a point where you are just completely out of your wheelhouse. So you have to start going into it with an attitude of humility and realizing that the reason that you're in the program is because you don't know everything. So most of the classes are going to be challenging, but there are going to be some classes that are really, really going to be a stretch. And just keep that in mind. Just know that it's happening. Everybody else in the program is going to be in the same position. And just realize that, hey, you know what? This is a new adventure, and I'm going to be learning new things. And sometimes that learning is going to be a little uncomfortable. So just be prepared for that. Okay, so going into my practical tips, really, really important. If there is one thing tip you take away from this video, this is the one that you should really pay attention to. Do everything you can to get your reading done ahead of time. And when I mean ahead of time, I mean before the term even starts, if at all possible. So when you get your new schedule for your classes, find out who's going to be the instructor, ask and send them an email and ask for a copy of the syllabus for the upcoming semester. If you don't get a response, or if the professor isn't assigned yet, you can always post in the group and ask what the previous semesters had for their reading list. A lot of times it's the same. And then order your books. And this is the other thing with this. I always try to go cheap as possible. When I started the program, Dr. Ordway was teaching one of the first classes that I took. And she said, when at all possible, always get a physical copy of the book, because your comprehension is just so much higher. So if you're going to be getting physical copies, sometimes those classes have long reading lists. And so I always try to go as cheap as possible. I buy used when I can. If you're ordering from a used bookseller, sometimes they can take about 3 weeks or sometimes even longer to get to you. So, plan ahead, order early, go as cheap as you can for books, and then get your reading done. So try to have your reading done ahead of time. So when you're actually in the classes, you can just be focusing on the discussion and your writing rather than trying to keep up with life and all the reading, because sometimes the reading can be pretty heavy. So if you can do that, if you don't, then I'm going to give you some other strategies a little bit later. So if you can't do that, this is my next tip for you. Make sure that you have a plan laid out for everything that you have coming up in terms of your classwork in a place where you can see it. Now, when I first started, I thought, they have this really cool app for Blackboard, and I thought, I can just keep track of my assignments there. It didn't work for me. I was completely lost until finally I said, forget this. And I just went back to what I did as an undergraduate. I printed out a paper calendar for the month, and then I would list all the readings I had to have done for that week. At the beginning of the week, I would have where the assignments were, and then put my reflection and any assignments for the class down. And then as I was going through the reading, I would just highlight them. And that, for me, that works because I'm visual, and there's something about having that physical paper and being able to mark it off. It just made it seem like more of an accomplishment, and that's something that that I knew that I was on track. So that's how I kept track of, making sure that I was up to speed on all my readings. So as far as preparation for the classes, if your first class is not research and writing, then go ahead and get Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book and read it ahead of time, because that has a lot of really great tips on reading strategies. Now, some of those reading strategies I had already done and have been doing for years, but there are some sections on syntopical reading and pre-reading that were really helpful. Also, as a business major, going into some of these philosophy classes, there were terms I just was not familiar with. And his tips on how to make a list of terms and definitions were just really, really helpful going through some of those classes that covered so much new ground. Again, this goes back to being able to have a copy of that syllabus. So if you have the syllabus, make sure you read through it and see what the questions are going to be for like reflections or essays, so that you can have those in the back of your mind as you're reading. So as you're reading, especially if you're reading ahead of time, try to write out those reflections if you can, because then that information will be fresh in your. Then when you have to submit it for class, then you can just clean it up a little bit. Okay, so you have your syllabus, you know what you're going to be having to write reflections on, and have that in your mind. But also keep in mind that your reading for this class is not just for this. Most of the people that I know from the program have continued to write. For example, several of us from the program started an Unexpected Journal, and we publish quarterly, and there's so many graduates from the program that are publishing just all over their own books in different journals and publications. And so as you're reading these works, you're not just reading for this particular essay or this particular reflection or for responses in this particular class. This is probably going to be works that you're drawing on ongoing. And so you need to start developing your own sort of file cabinet for those great quotes. Now, just to be honest with you, I'm still kind of fine-tuning my own process for this. When I was an undergraduate, what they taught us was to write it on index cards and then put those cards on a ring, and that's how we would write notes for writing papers. It doesn't really, I've tried that in this program. It didn't really work as well. I know some people use Evernote for different quotes from books. I'm going to talk about Zotero a little bit later, which is a program where you can keep track of your sources. And it does have an option for attaching notes to your sources. And some people use that to keep track of quotes. That just doesn't really work. It hasn't really worked that well for me. So what I've been doing recently, I create just basically a text file for that particular book in Scrivener, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I just put all the quotes that I think I might someday want to be able to go back to and cite, and I put them in that file, and then I put a page number by it so I can go back and find it. So that's one way to do it. The other thing that I've been doing recently, sometimes I've been going through the Benedict option. I've just been getting Post-its and writing thoughts in books and sticking it in there. And I write a lot in margins too, but sometimes, margins aren't big enough for my thoughts about a particular passage. So that's one thing that I've been doing. As you're reading through the book, sometimes, some books will have indexes, others won't, but sometimes there'll be themes that you might want to refer back to. But once you get out of the book, you might not remember it or remember exactly where it was. So this is, we just did a read through of City of God in the summer. And so this is that's what I did for this. So this edition of City has some pretty massive categorization, but I also included my own, which was in the back. And I can't remember if this is one of the tips from How to Read a Book. Different things that aren't necessarily going to show up in the book index. I make my own, and then I put the page numbers beside it when it's referenced. And so that's especially helpful in fiction that is not going to have any sort of index at all. So for example, the first time I did this was in Dr. Ward's class on literature and apologetics, and when we were reading Lord of the Rings. So some of the themes that I had for Two Towers were the illusion of neutrality, which was on pages 30, 69, 92, on hope, and that was on pages 23, 58, 108, 128, 152, 136, on despair. So things like that. So for writing itself, I use a program called Scrivener for absolutely everything. Now, before I started the program, I had heard about it, but I thought, why do I need to get another program when I already have Microsoft Word? I just didn't really see what the point was. So when I started using Scrivener, it made it really, really easy to flip back and forth between classes and go back and find those sources. That it was like a total game changer. Now I use Scrivener for absolutely everything I write. So I have project files for all different types of things. If it's anything that I write more than a couple sentences, it's probably going into a Scrivener file. So I had a project file specifically for the apologetics program. And then each class had its own folder. And then underneath that, I had subfolders for discussion posts, for reflections, like when you take Dr. Kulakona's class, you do briefs. So however the class is organized, I had a subfolder for, and so then it makes it really easy to find, if you're like, okay, well, I wrote about this in this class, it makes it really easy to find it otherwise, because I don't know about you, but before I had Scrivener, I would have like pieces of writing all across my computer. This is another tip. So when you're doing your discussion posts, always write it outside of a Blackboard. I mean, if you have like a short 2-sentence reply, okay, fine. But other than that, write it outside of Blackboard and then copy and paste it in there, because there's nothing more frustrating than writing a huge long post or response and then having Blackboard crash and then you've lost all your work. The other upside of this, you'll have that post as a reference. So in your class, there's going to be a section for a writer's workshop. And that is intended to give drafts of your essay for feedback, and then to give feedback on other people's essay. I will be honest, I think I only did that a couple of times during the entire time that I was in the program. And that is actually my biggest regret now. So the thing was, I usually was writing up to the last minute. I didn't have my draft done early enough. And then the other thing was, I really didn't want to have somebody else's ideas in my head while I was writing. So I didn't want to edit somebody else's while I was still writing mine on the same topic, if that makes sense. But the reason I regret that now is that, that is such a huge part of the program. And I didn't even realize it until afterwards, after when we had started the journal. I could have been a much stronger editor now if I had actually participated in that. And that's my huge regret. And my next tip is start building your resource library now. So these aren't just books. These are now your tools. And you need to have a good system for categorizing that reference library. So if you don't already have a bibliography system, then definitely start and get one now. I use Zotero, which is, again, I did not discover this until I think my last semester in the program. This is a total game changer. It's awesome. So once I found Zotero, I started entering my backlog of books. So I had all my resources there. It makes citing sources so much easier. So I have, within Zotero, you can have folders for collections for different books. So I have one folder that's just my library. Every book that I buy, I create an entry in Zotero. When I was in the program, I had a folder for the apologetics program, and then I would have a subfolder under that for the class. So anything I read for that class would go into that subfolder. And then when I was writing, I would have a folder for that particular essay. So if I had something in my own library that I was citing, I just copy and paste that in. And then as you're writing, of course, you're getting all these other references. It may not, it may be journal articles or online articles. And then I could create a reference right in that. So you have a list of all your sources right there. Then once I was done with the essay, and once I had, finalized the sources that I was actually using, because of course, as you're resourcing, you're going to have this huge amount of resources and you're not going to use them all. I would have a subfolder off of that, and then I would put the sources that were actually included in that essay in that final folder for the essay. This so super easy, because when you go to this, as you're entering your citation, once you have all that information in there, when you're configuring the program, you can configure it for the citation format that you're going to use. So for the apologetics program, you would use Turabian, right? Once you've added that source to your Zotero file, highlight the source and do Control Shift A. This is for Windows, and then paste it, and you have your footnote entry. And all you have to do is add the page number, which is absolutely amazing. And I know this is something a lot of people struggle with, because that is probably the most time we spend when we're editing the journal essays is getting the citations in. Zach is way nicer than I am. He will actually go track down citations for people. I just tell them to go look it up, get it themselves. But anyway, this is a game changer. It makes it so much easier. As far as entering them, this is another thing I was just entering all the details manually until I took Dr. Hatchett's class in systematic theology, and he had told us about you can get a bookmarklet for Zotero, install it on IceChrome. So I'm sure it goes on other ones too. And so all you have to do is, like, if you're going to like a listing for a book on Amazon or a journal article, and this also works on some news sites, like if you're going to the New York Times or the Washington Post, when they have the metadata properly encoded. And all you have to do is hit that Zotero button, and it will just populate all the fields for that source. So I'm going to use this Phil Catchings book that he just published, Note to Self, because I haven't added that to my library yet. So you just go to Amazon, to that listing. So when you do that, and there's data there that Zotero is going to be able to identify, it will kind of activate that little bookmarklet. And then you just click the bookmarklet, and it will automatically populate all that information into Zotero. So you just want to make sure that you have selected the folder that you want that to be populated into. And then once you do that, so you do want to check to make sure that it's entered the information correct. Most of the time, it will be pretty clean. You might have to clean up the location and the date. I've noticed that Zotero doesn't always identify the authors correctly when you have multiple authors. So you just have to check the entry, but then you're done. It takes all the stress and work out of doing citations. It's amazing. There's some people that are way more expert about all the features of Zotero. This is just what I use it for. The other really awesome thing about this is, like I said, if you have a subfolder for like your particular essay and you have all your sources in there, watch this. This is an example of an essay that I wrote. You select the folder with all the sources, right click, and then it says create bibliography from collection. So you select that, and then it will ask you what format you want. Again, this automatically comes up Turabian. Because that's what I have it set for. You click OK, and then you Control V, and there you go. It's all formatted, again, like magic. It's awesome. Those are my practical tips. If you follow those tips, I promise you it will make life so much easier for you as you're going through the program. Okay, but here comes the advice that really matters. This is what I've noticed. People don't struggle or drop out of the program because of the academic challenges or the writing or citing sources. It's not any of that. It's everything else that comes along in life. I think that most people that I know would say that hell literally broke loose when they joined the program. And people, I think a lot of times, just aren't prepared for that. And I don't say that to scare you, but just so you know that you're not the only one that's had their formally ordered life turned upside down. When we talk about spiritual battles, it actually is a war. And that's one thing that Dr. Ordway included in her welcome letter to students that I received when I first started the program. She said that as apologists, you're entering the front lines of the war. So you need to be prepared, and you need to be grounded, not only in a church fellowship and grounded by reading the word daily, but in daily prayer. You can't afford to be lax about spiritual disciplines as you're going through the program. And sometimes that makes it really difficult because there is going to be so much more stress and so much more demands on your time. But just remember, that has to be the foundation of going through the program. So because of that, it's really important that you have a team. You need people to encourage you, people to pray for you, and a community to pour into so you don't get isolated in Me, Myself, and I and all those books. So if you feel overwhelmed, ask for help and prayer. If you don't understand a concept, ask for help. If you think your essay is circular file material, ask for help and prayer. Don't think you have to do it all on your own, because nobody can. If you feel like you're drowning, guess what? You're not the only one that's been there. Other people have been there too. So just be willing to ask for help. Realize that you can't get through it on your own. So here's the other thing that I would just add now, that I think sometimes you think, okay, I'm getting into the apologetics program, and when I graduate, then I'm going to start using it. That's not the way it works. God will use you as you go. And this will happen. You will be reading something or have a discussion in the program, and then you'll be out and that topic will come up. So be expecting it and look for those openings and opportunities. Don't think that somebody else is more qualified. You don't need a degree or position to give the answer. God's brought you to the place where you are learning about these things. He's equipped you, and He has brought you to that opportunity. So step into that opportunity and be the one that God uses to bring an answer, light, and life into somebody's circumstances. But God will use you as you go. So don't miss those opportunities. So to wrap it all up, this is a verse that I continually go back to, not only in the program, but even God gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. So when you feel overwhelmed, remember who you have on your side. So welcome aboard, and I'm so excited to see what God's going to be doing for you. So those are my tips, and I hope you find them helpful. See you next time.